Hello my friends, Arlo here, and today we're reviewing RiME. It's another game in a preposterously long line of third-party ports coming to the Switch in the month of November. The question is, will this long-awaited indie title wind up in the figurative digital trash can, or will it artsy-fartsy its way into my heartsy? Let's find out. RiME has been on my radar for a good while now. An artistic, stylish indie adventure game in a mysterious fantasy setting? Sign me up! This kind of game is my jam! I was tempted to pick it up on PS4 when it released back in May, but as I always do, I had way too many games to play, and the promise of a later Switch port just cinched it. I could wait a few months. I wish I could say it was worth the wait to play it on my little handheld, but unfortunately I can't. So in RiME, you play as a young boy and you wake up on a beach with no idea where you are or how you got there. You're drawn to a gigantic tower in the distance and led along by a mysterious hooded figure and a little spirit fox. The game is all about solving puzzles to progress and piecing together the story as you go. I can't go any further without talking about the biggest issue, however, because it's with you from your very first moments in the game. RiME runs terribly on the Switch. The frame rate chugs along, and especially in these big complex opening areas, it can lag and stutter so much I wonder how they could even release it in this state. I mean, that sounds really harsh and I feel terrible for saying it. Tequila Works is a small studio. I'm sure they're doing their best, but just look at this. Now, to be fair, it's not always this bad. In fact, weirdly enough, it seemed to get better the further I progressed in the game. That could just be because the environments get smaller with less going on in certain parts versus the first and second act's sprawling landscapes. That low frame rate is pretty prevalent though, and even when it's relatively high, there are still little judders throughout. As far as graphics go, I'd say they're okay. They're not the best, but they're certainly not the worst. The game's lacking polish in a lot of places, and the character has this weird bleedy ghost thing going on when he moves, and it looks really gross, especially against lighter colors. There's also a filter or something on the screen that makes everything look really muddy in dark areas. However, the art style's nice. It's the sort of clean, simplistic style we see a lot with these type of games. I wouldn't call it beautiful, though there are certainly elements that look really nice. The tower looming over you, the art pieces you find on the walls, a lot of the architecture, little touches here and there that give the world an artistic flair. The use of color is quite pleasant, especially in the starting area. The surrounding landscape looks really nice against the ocean and the sky. Unfortunately, performance once again rears its head. Things look pretty decent in dock mode, but at least in this reviewer's opinion, they look really not good in handheld mode. The resolution is just too low, which is confusing considering this game's minimalist graphics. I can't show you here, but the world is fuzzy, and your character in particular is super pixelated to the point of being distracting. It's hard to see finer details, which is an even bigger problem if you're looking for secrets. Considering these issues, it's really hard to tell if I liked this game. The genre requires a certain level of patience, and you've got to try your best to get yourself into it so you care about the world and the story, but the frame rate most of all made it really hard to immerse myself. Your character already moves pretty slowly, and some of these puzzles have you running around all over the place back and forth, so lag and judders on top of that dragged the whole thing down. Even the cutscenes weren't safe, and in fact, some of the worst drops were during the cutscenes, which could really kill the mood. And I think all this would have been easier to forgive if under the surface I enjoyed what I found a little more. That's not to say I think RiME is a bad game, but it's certainly not perfect. The controls are pretty inconsistent. You spend a lot of time picking stuff up and putting it down, but when you run up to something, you have to wait until your run animation is finished before your button press does anything. This seems like a tiny nitpick, but it gets really old. Every single time I ever wanted to grab something, I would run up, hit Y once or twice before giving an annoyed grunt and waiting a second, then hitting Y. It's just hard to remember. It feels more natural to just run up and hit Y, and you can see me struggling to figure out how to pick up an object right here at the start of the game. I hit Y like a million times, but each time I guess I was coming out of an animation caused by the other buttons or something. It only ever works when you're in the exact right position and standing perfectly still. The controls are at their worst though when you're climbing. The game has a hard time knowing what direction you're trying to move, and when trying to jump backwards off a ledge, I had to spin the stick around before I found the one random direction that made it work, and it was different every time depending on the camera angle, I assume. Much like the graphics, the puzzles are fairly middle of the road. There are some pretty good ones, and I love how the game uses shapes and shadows as a means of progression. Throughout your playthrough, you'll find many of these ones where you've got to line up the shapes, though I feel like this idea wasn't explored to its fullest potential. More often than not, the real puzzle is finding the object. You need to complete the shape, and once you have it, sometimes you only need to nudge the control stick a tiny bit before the shape snaps into place and you win the puzzle. Lots of the puzzles are straightforward enough that they don't take too much thought, and a few were a little frustrating. The game has something of a conveyance issue. It does try its best coloring climbable ledges and placing symbols in key areas, which sometimes help to avoid confusion, and sometimes just tell you where to put something without letting you figure it out on your own. The main problem is that sometimes it can be hard to tell what you're supposed to interact with, or what surfaces you're able to climb. Most of the time, when I had a hard time figuring out what to do, I was just missing some small detail, like, oh man, this puzzle is hard, I'm really twisting my brain to figure it out. Oh no, wait, I just didn't realize I could grab this. And like I said earlier, you move kinda slow, so puzzles where you've got to run back and forth, especially when you're trying to figure out what to do, can be a little annoying. For all its issues though, RiME does do a lot of things right. The story is largely predictable, but the ending is great and really opens up a discussion about the whole experience, and any story that makes you think on it for a while once it's through is a winner in my book. And the world and its various scenarios are very cool. I'm mostly only showing footage from the first act, but after this point you'll go through some really interesting stuff, both visually and conceptually. It's a big feel game. It very much wants you to just enjoy being in this strange place and wonder at the things you see. While the performance and the less than perfect gameplay did lessen my immersion and sense of wonder, there were some sequences and ideas that I thought were downright neato. Especially with the beautiful score carrying it along, the game does establish a great tone. One thing that impressed me about RiME was how big the game world is in relation to how much of it you actually use. Designing an area takes time, so often a game will squeeze as much as it can out of each one, making you run from end to end solving puzzles and collecting stuff before letting you move on to the next one. But there are big places in RiME you just run through. You're pulled along a linear path so you can progress, especially when you're chasing the fox dude, but sometimes I was surprised to dash straight through some big place with a lot of stuff in it that I could clearly go off and explore if I wanted to, and then just not return to it. Like, I thought this must be the new area I'll be hanging around and solving puzzles in, but the game would be like, nope, that was just some in-between space, we've already moved on. There are sections with impressive set pieces that are behind you in seconds. Large portions of the game, in fact, have you just running forward at full speed for decently long stretches. This did a lot to make it feel like the world was real and not just a series of corridors to get to the end of. I always felt like maybe I was missing something by not combing every single inch of it. And really, there does appear to be a lot of stuff to collect. I mean, lots and lots of stuff. I only found a tiny fraction. I'm sure that if I were to veer off the beaten path at every opportunity, I would have been rewarded with toys and lullaby pieces and whatnot. But I just didn't feel particularly motivated to do so. It felt so sluggish to get around that I was pretty much set on getting to my next destination as soon as possible, with only minor detours when something or other caught my interest. I think one of RiME's biggest problems is that it very obviously draws inspiration from a few sources that will be obvious within the first few minutes. That in and of itself isn't a bad thing. Just about every game draws inspiration from something, but the problem is that in some ways it's so similar to the games it emulates that I can't help but start comparing. And when I do that, RiME doesn't quite hit the mark. Like I said earlier though, I just don't know how much more I would have enjoyed the game if it performed better. I would have always had issues with the controls and the tedious nature of some of the puzzles, but it's possible that I might have felt more immersed and ultimately found myself wanting to really explore the world and caring more about the snippets of story insight provided by the collectibles. If you're into the whole mysterious, emotional, narrative, artsy indie game thing, I do suggest giving RiME a try. It sounds like most people enjoyed it a lot. It's got a great big world to explore with a lot of interesting stuff to see and a story that really makes you stop and think. Just keep in mind two things if you do. One, it's $30 for about a 6-hour game if you're not into combing for secrets, so you gotta be okay with that. Two, I can't suggest getting it on Switch. I mean, taking your time and digging for secrets is something that's perfect for handheld play, but between the inconsistent frame rate and the blurry, low-res visuals in handheld mode, you're probably better off playing it on another system. With bad and good in about equal parts, that means RiME for the Switch sits at the middle of the scale with a 4 out of 7. Before we go, it's time for an Arlo Direct. This Arlo Direct exists purely to tell you that yes, the review for Super Mario Odyssey is coming. I figured it was already too late to get that boost in views that comes from, you know, doing a review right at launch, so when reviewing opportunities for Doom and RiME came up, I took them. The Mario review's coming along very nicely though, and it won't be too long at all before it's done. And that's it. See you next time for another super in-depth and interesting Arlo Direct.